Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
I have two guests today on the Cognitive Crucible. First is Dr. John DeRosa, who is an Army Senior Fellow at Amazon Web Service, and Alex Del Castillo, who is Vice President of Public Sector at Zignal Labs. John and Alex, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. Good
Thanks,
to be
John.
here.
The conversation that I'd like to have with you two guys today is about measuring effectiveness of operations in the information environment. But before we do that, perhaps you could both give our audience just a little bit more background about your careers. Alex, do you think we could start with you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks very much for having me on the show today. My name is Alex Del Castillo. I work for Zignal Labs. I'm the Vice President, and I run their public sector operations worldwide. Really great to be here just in terms of my background and how I got into this. Prior to Zignal Labs, I was working as a consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton. I managed a lot of their business for different SOCOM clients. Previously, I was a naval intelligence officer and then an enlisted Marine. And then in another life, I actually served 10 years as a prosecutor and an attorney in Chicago. And so I've kind of run the gamut on these strategic communication jobs, consulting jobs, and now here I find myself in the tech sector working with folks like John.
Thanks, Alex. Really excited to be here, John, particularly sharing the platform with Alex, who's been a good friend along the way and a mentor in this process. As you said before, I'm an Army Senior Fellow with Amazon Web Services. I'm using this opportunity with Amazon Web Service, and one of my projects is partnering with Zignal Labs, doing an analytical collaboration to sort of help ground their narrative intelligence platform, but also explore how AWS solutions can help expand their growing repertoire of tools. Where I'm coming from, I'm an Army civilian strategist within a Theater Special Operations Command. Previously spent time in the Pentagon on the Joint Staff and the Army staff, also an Army veteran myself. I came to my particular academic study while pursuing a PhD at George Mason University while working full-time at the Pentagon. I still stay connected to my research. Right now I'm collaborating on a paper that considers the intersection of narratives and strategic choices in the Arctic. And I'm developing a narrative-based serious game to build on what we've learned. And I'm also using my time at AWS to deep dive into artificial intelligence and machine learning, because I like to explore how strategy is constructed in the advent of AI, sort of analogous to the advent of the nuclear age. So that's where I'm at.
All right, outstanding. Thanks to you both for that. Could one of you, this may be a good one for Alex, could you give just a quick background on Zignal and y'all's platform and maybe just a view of how you've gotten to where you are today?
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. So I'm actually uniquely positioned with Zignal Labs, and I think it's been a fun collaboration. So right now I'm the vice president, but before I was actually a customer of Zignal Labs for about 5 years. It's really interesting that I use the platform to further a lot of our clients' mission sets. Just to give you a little bit of background around the company, it is a traditional California, San Francisco tech startup. The background of the company was actually in politics and political campaigning. So, folks on different campaign teams that needed to get a better understanding of the information environment for their own candidates and for strategic messaging, developed this platform and founded the company to get at just that problem. But as the years have gone by and it's drifted more into this strategic communication, threat, risk assessment, information operations realm, it started to gain steam, and it used to be a fully commercial company that really only did work with the private sector. Now it's kind of morphed into a public sector business as well. And we're at the point now where the company is about 50-50. I think where it shines as a platform is in the realm of strategic communications and information operations. But as time continues to go on, I find it being a better assessment tool if you want to do a look back, but it has real-time capability as well. So everything from real-time situational awareness, building that common operational picture, developing a geospatial capability is part of the mission set. As far as differentiators go, I mean, I know that this is a crowded field, and I've used many different software tools and platforms. Zignal Labs is a little bit different because in terms of their history and what they do as a company, they've never been a company that scrapes data. They always go direct to the source. They make the investment in purchasing full data fire hose access, so they have all that metadata. And rather uniquely, the company has a strategic partnership with Twitter against the entire fire hose. We have data access to the whole of Russian social media and VK data. And we also have access to the whole of Chinese social media and Sinoweibo data. So the amount of metadata that we have, the amount of geospatial understanding and awareness, the amount of narrative intelligence, the degree to which we can do that is just superior because we've never cut corners with the data quality. And that, I think, is what sets Zignal apart.
Back to an earlier comment you made. So it sounds like your customer base started off predominantly commercial-based customers, and it's slowly morphed into more national security customers. But I'm curious, has there been I don't know what the right word is, like a blurring of the lines between commercial and national security needs, in that you're finding that the commercial sector is starting to need the same kinds of insights that the national security sector is clamoring for, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating, and I think at least from what I've seen, getting out of the public sector and moving into this business, both the commercial and government sides, they kind of seem to point fingers at each other and say that the other is more advanced or ahead. A lot of the use cases are just analogs of one another, right? So on the commercial side, everybody's always understood that there's a need for marketing data and to back up your strategic communication marketing team, your public affairs team, right? So the use cases there are marketing driven. And then the analog of that, of course, in the military is stratcom, information operations, to a degree, psychological operations, civil affairs, right? It's all the training in the military and the government reads like a marketing manual, right? To a certain degree. And so the use cases are similar there. I think as time has gone on, we have seen the need in the government, of course, for real-time situational awareness. So you want an understanding of the online environment, the information environment, because that information environment often informs offline actions and threats and risks. And so we understand that, I think, very acutely in the government and the public sector, that you need to be able to develop that operational intelligence picture. And private industry and commercial enterprise, from what I can see, they understand that they need a security apparatus in place to protect their own logistics, supplies, personnel, employees, and things of that nature. But I believe that sector in the commercial space is still a bit underdeveloped and doesn't receive the degree of funding that obviously the public sector will have. So yeah, so there is a bit of a departure. the commercial sector seems to be more, I don't want to say capable, but I think they have a better understanding of how to effectively do marketing and strategic communications. I mean, they're very, very good at that. Whereas I think from what I've seen, the government has a much better sense of how to do operational intelligence and threat and risk assessment and force protection and things of that nature. So both sides have a lot to learn from one another. And I think the platform that we're using right now enables both mission sets.
That last point you were making is so interesting, and numerous times in this podcast forum, we've talked about cross-pollination between the commercial tech sector and the national security sector, and the need for more of that.
Well, so to that point, I mean, a key difference, and what always strikes me now that I'm in contact with the commercial enterprise side and listen, to the problems that they're having. The issue on the commercial side is usually driven by the fact that they don't have that infrastructure, right? It's all a sunk cost. If you as a commercial enterprise are devoting seats and resources to analysts, whether in strategic communications or in security, that's just an administrative cost that your business has to eat. It's not driving further profits, right? Whereas the government customers and the government clients always have staff do a lot of heavy analytical work, and so they've invested more in developing out that process, frankly, really, whether it's strategic communications or threat and risk assessment. So the government has the infrastructure and the personnel to do the work. The commercial sector less so, and they have less lessons learned to build upon. So yeah, it's an interesting problem all around.
Yeah, for sure. John, I'd like to bring you into this discussion a little bit. So you are actually doing what I was describing just a moment ago, that cross-pollination between the national security, government GS employee doing a internship or fellowship at AWS. Could you take a beat on what you perceive to be the benefits to DoD for people like you doing exactly what you're doing right now?
So absolutely, I would say the cross-pollination at AWS and Amazon writ large is actually pretty interesting. They took a cue from the 2018 National Defense Strategy and the charge for collaboration, bridging the distance between the commercial sector, private industry, and the defense, the defense architecture, and in that sense offered opportunities to bring uniformed members and civilian members alike over to sit on various teams. And I was just at a summit with all my other fellows a few weeks ago in Seattle, and I am amazed to hear what of the experiences that these officers, these enlisted, and these civilians are participating in various different business units at Amazon, whether it's gaming, whether it's satellite communications, whether it's cyber policy, edge technology. It's pretty fascinating to hear, and I've had an opportunity to share with a lot of these fellows and the things that they're taking away. Obviously, the culture of innovation that Amazon is known for is certainly one thing. The way, I'll give a quick example is, instead of making decisions by PowerPoint, Amazon makes decisions by paper, a 6-pager or a press release FAQ in their working backwards process. So there are approaches that Amazon is taking on to grow its business and support its customers that have been valuable in bringing back to the government, but also back the other way. I would say it's been a valuable time in sharing the voice of the customer directly with product teams, software engineers and developers who are making solutions, who don't quite often have that opportunity to sit down and talk with a customer directly, and see what, how can they use the particular thing that they're inventing, because they're inventing a lot of things at Amazon. It's pretty amazing how their inventions are supporting customer needs.
I'd like to transition over into our main discussion item here, and that's measuring effectiveness in the information environment. Could one of you give a high level, what are you talking about? What's the need and what's the current state of the art, I guess, in measuring the effectiveness of IO?
Yeah, so Alex, if you don't mind, what I'll share with you is, I will say, for us, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of not just measuring what's happening in the information environment, but the operations in the information environment, or activities in the information environment, have been crucial, in fact, in some cases, leading the way in a lot of our campaigns, particularly when we're talking about special operations campaigns. What is happening in the information environment becomes a pillar of success there. And so we're not just measuring the effectiveness of information operations, we're measuring the effectiveness of whole campaigns. And so to do that, we're bringing together a number of different tools and disciplines to make that happen. All, if I can, John, all within the context of a very significant transition I mentioned earlier, and I'm certain your listeners are familiar. The 2018 National Defense Strategy, what marked a significant transition from the focus on the wars in the Middle East to great power competition, in particular with the competitors of China and Russia. And for special operations in particular, the demonstration of competition is represented in the gray zone activities of our adversaries, things that are happening below the threshold of armed conflict. And many of those actions manifest in the form of, ambiguous use of unconventional warfare, political interference, economic coercion, but also disinformation and the spread of propaganda and the attempts of sowing division within societies. So this is the context. The context really is the context of competition, and how are we measuring the ability? Are we being successful in our campaigns across the board? And in this sense, for information becomes a key proponent to that challenge.
Yeah, thanks. I don't want to get too far ahead of the conversation, but maybe this is a good time to ask this. So when I think about measuring effectiveness, for me at least, it's helpful to think of commercial sector marketing and measures of effectiveness for advertising, like overt legal advertising. And I know that this is an imperfect analogy, but it might be a good kind of like scene setter or start point. But I can imagine that a corporation, they unfurl, like Super Bowl ad campaigns, right? Or any kind of new product or product enhancement, gets advertised on YouTube, via browsers, billboards, newspapers, you name it. Commercial companies shotgun out some kind of a nuanced, choreographed marketing campaign, and then they can presumably they have measures of effectiveness, which is everything from increased revenue to I don't know what other measures, but it seems like it would be easier in a commercial setting to measure the effectiveness of marketing campaigns, but there's probably some kind of an analog on the national security side, but it would be harder as well. So
Yeah,
there's a question in there somewhere. Could you talk about that,
no,
please?
it may be harder, but again, it's tied to the how closely tied the information environment and information ops to campaigning. It becomes easier. And what I would say is, for example, if you were to think of a measure of effectiveness of a campaign, who is operating under this context of competition, one thing that you could measure is whether or not our allies and our partners are amplifying our narratives, and more importantly, is a target audience amplifying our narratives with a positive sentiment. And that's only the first step, right? That's the only first example. You could the analogy in the marketing sense is are the tweets about the Super Bowl ads positive, and are they being amplified in a positive way, and are they reaching your target audience for your campaign? Same way you would consider, are your messages, are your narratives reaching that population that you're interested in, and is that population engaging with them? Are they sharing? Are they liking? Are they retweeting? Are they mimicking you? A very nice measure of effectiveness is whether or not your allies and partners are using the same messages. Are they mimicking similar messages that you want in the information environment? So I think it's easily mapped together.
Right. As you're talking, I had this like mental image of like the ocean or a lake or some body of water that may be relatively calm, or maybe it's got ripples on it, but it's like if you drop a little piece of information into the edge of the lake or something like that, there's ripples across, and I'm almost envisioning that kind of a diffusion of information, or some way of being able to measure the percolation of the effect of a piece of information and how it's being translated across the ecosystem. Are those the kinds of measures of effectiveness that you guys are working on somehow?
I think the one thing I would point to is the geographic representation of where that Zignal is able to show where and how far and to what degree populations are engaging with particular content that you're looking at. But I would also point out, and Alex, I'll pass it back to you. What you just described, John, is a challenge in that like a lake, the information environment is always transitioning. And so when we look at these, we have to recognize that it's only a disposition, right? At the time of this particular estimate or this particular analysis, this is what's happening. When the ripple makes its way across the pond, the source of the ripple will have changed, right? What it looks like at the source of the ripple will have changed. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, so I love the metaphor, but I'm gonna talk to you why I think we have to go beyond that metaphor, because I think it's a really good one, but I think it shortchanges our technical capability. I think we've evolved our capabilities beyond that. When you're talking about looking at the ripple in the lake, if we focus on that ripple, we're missing the rest of the lake. And the lake provides the context. I mean, that is the information environment. That's what we need to be looking at and understanding and exploring for years at a time. We need to be able to measure that data pool and that whole information environment in order to understand just how big the ripple is, where the ripple is going, what effects it's having on the rest of the information environment or the rest of the species in the lake, right? I mean, to continue the metaphor. Now, there was a time years ago, a decade ago, 20 years ago, where you probably only had the capability to look at the ripple. You could look at news articles in a magazine or in a newspaper and see maybe how many there were. You could get a sense of circulation. You might be able to draw a couple inferences from it. But nowadays, and I mean, a shout out to Zignal Labs that's looking at like 1 billion mentions a second or some absolutely outrageous number, right? And frankly, which I think has it's one of the biggest customers of Amazon Web Services, right? Just the data ingestion capabilities and analysis capabilities alone. But you can look at the entire lake. You can look at the entire ocean and still look at your ripple. So I think we need to broaden the horizons and think bigger in order to get to those measures of effectiveness that you want to get at. And I think that the smaller scale thinking is a little bit, it's restrictive. When we're working in information operations or for the military, and we start to deploy different tools and software capabilities to get at this problem. You know, the issue I see every single time is it's a couple weeks before an exercise, and then everybody says, oh my God, we gotta build a keyword search and then build a baseline and have it run for a good month before the event happens. And then they do that. And the keyword search is as complicated as hashtag exercise name or operation. And then it passes. And then they might do an assessment a couple weeks later. And they'll find out that something was tweeted or something landed on a Facebook page and it had 1,000 impressions. And they say, that's either success or not success. But they haven't really done any work. They haven't established any context. They haven't built a long-term baseline. They haven't dug in and done the research necessary to create a system to explore the impact that you're having on the information environment over months and frankly years or even a decade. And the methodology that I would propose and what I've instituted alongside John by using the Zignal platform for different clients in the US government is we said, okay, look, we're going to do the hard work up front. We're going to kind of in a de facto sense define your measures of effectiveness by looking at a piece of the information environment, if we think in geographic terms. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to define all of the people or institutions or organizations that we think are worth listening to. So you take a country like Russia. Let's go ahead, do hard research and figure out what are all their top media institutions and where do they operate online? Who are all their top political leaders and where do they operate? What about all their consulates and embassies worldwide and their messaging apparatus? Where are they operating online and in social media? Where are their top banks, businesses, and trade organizations that are sanctioned and where do they operate? And then I'll tell you what, we now have the technical capability to look at and ingest every single message they all put out in the information environment, agnostic of topic. And then we're also going to capture all of the engagement worldwide without restrictions. And that's going to give us a huge data lake to place everything in context. And then in the future, when there are exercises or operations or activities that we want to measure the impact that they've had, we can go ahead and filter that data for references to the exercise or the operation, the activity. We can do that not only for an adversary, but then we can also use that same approach to look at our own US or allied messaging. And then we could build out a similar system within a country or a partner or an ally and look at their own organic output and all of the associated engagements. So what you're doing is you're building long-term baselines that work agnostic of the topic. You're creating that repository of data, and then you're enabling the ability to search against it in perpetuity. So what is it? You're basically building strategic communications or an information operations, like a stock index for a country. Every once in a while, you might replace who you want to listen to because they're no longer a representative company, right? You got to swap them out with another. But you have a long-term baseline understanding of the information environment. And the funny thing is that when you define in advance through hard research who you want to listen to, who matters, then you're really automatically building in your own measures of effectiveness for your government organization. Because if you start bringing them into the conversation and people are interacting with them in the context of the narratives that you are trying to push, or the operations and activities and investments that you're making in the region, well, then you're finally getting a sense of, am I being effective? I mean, what is the impact on the people who I think matter? And that's a huge coup. We did that with the Zignal platform, where we were looking at thousands of key influencers around the globe for particular countries and troubled regions, for particular adversaries, for our own US and allied influence. And that gave us the ability to not only establish multi-year running baselines, but now we can query against those massive baselines and data lakes and say, here's how we did in this exercise this year, when it is placed in the context of adversary messaging or partner nation messaging or US messaging. We can look at the engagement, the breakdowns of the topics, the conversation, the sentiment, and then we can compare it year over year over year to see if there's been any improvement. And that is the direction that things need to go. But it starts with the knowledge that now our technology, our AI, machine learning capabilities are so advanced that we can look at the entire information environment and then see that side by side with the little ripple in the lake, giving it context. That's the direction we need to go.
Yeah, that is really cool. And also what I hear when you describe all of that is the ability to examine the information environment from a whole bunch of different contexts. If you think of it, well, okay, I recognize that my lake analogy is a little bit lacking, but if you just first visualize a lake again, and it just looks like a body of water, but you guys have gone through and you have labeled it in all kinds of ways that enable slicing and dicing, I guess. So you can look at, just like, the Russian network globally, or you could do it for China, or you could look at, okay, well, forget about a country specific context. Let's look at a country or a geographic specific context. And then it's like, okay, well, let's not do that now. Now let's look at it from, say, like critical infrastructure sectors. Let's just look at it from like the equities of the energy sector or the equities globally, right? Or regionally. So there's all kinds of ways you can slice and dice the information environment and then take a look at these temporal data over time. Yeah.
My point, so the lake analogy is actually perfect. It's spot on. My thought is when I hear the lake analogy, or when we say let's look at the ripple, I just want to make sure that we understand we look at the ripple in the context of the lake. We're not seeing the ripple as the primary thing. The ripple is an effect that is occurring on the lake. And so and if we're going to make any progress and really understand what the impact is, well, then we've got to understand what the lake is. We have to capture that. So I'm saying, let's think big, right? Because when you've got these very, very sophisticated tools and platforms that are frankly overpowered for most of what we do, let's think in terms of let's pull down the entire lake, get an understanding of that, and then place the ripple in context.
All right, so that's a fantastic description of what you guys at Zignal have built, Alex. So the natural follow-up is, what are you doing with this capability? Is there a case study or some kind of an operationalization scenario that one of you guys can talk about with our audience?
What I can offer is, and you hinted at it a little bit, and Alex hinted at it a little bit, is that at the time I got to the Theater Special Operations Command, the military lacked the capability to visualize the information environment and to even how to assess the threat that develop campaigns to disrupt these adversaries' tactics. And you mentioned, what one example was the military was using very rudimentary social media analytics to gauge the velocity of the adversaries' information operations. Often what we were faced with was just simply recording how many readers and what was their sentiment of a Washington Post article. But what that tended to miss was the context of the populations that we were interested in. Like, what were their engagement with that Washington Post article? Did they even read the English language news article? And how did their perceptions change at all? And when I was asking these questions, I came face to face with this guy, Alex del Castillo, who was working on putting together, using Zignal as a platform, but also putting together this ability to track the various influencers, whether it be the adversary, whether it be us, whether it be allies and partners, and to show the difference in between. And when he started showing me these tools, what dawned on me is, man, if we could just kind of do mixed methods approach to bring all of these capabilities to bear, we can have a nice estimate of the information environment. We termed them dispositional estimates just to be sure to know that, yeah, this is only a snapshot in time. There's going to be another stone cast in that lake causing a ripple in a different part, and it's going to change. But we can capture what is happening in this place and in this time. And one of the ways we did that was to bring together a number of different, very rudimentary, I would say, social science methods. How can we bring together content analysis? How can we bring together narrative analysis? How can we bring process tracing to meld them together into a picture about what's happening at that time in the information environment? So in this sense, narrative analysis can help us reveal some patterns of the narrative engagement and perceived sentiment with those particular narratives. Content analysis, which is a strength of Zignal platform, but it helps us map that narrative landscape by visualizing the interaction of populations with the narratives between those various networks, between the US network, between the adversary network, and with the local population and their influencers. And then process tracing allows us to correlate the inferences between those narratives, our engagement in the information environment, and the interaction of the population and relevant actors in that population. And the aim then is how to discover the patterns in that population engagement and evaluate the relationship between what we are doing, what the adversary was doing, what local influencers are doing, and what are the consequences associated with either amplifying or potentially dampening intended narrative propositions. And so these patterns that we uncovered through content analysis, process tracing, narrative analysis, were distinctly tied back to the measures of effectiveness of our campaign plan. What, for example, whether or not allies or partners, their populations were were amplifying our narratives, and whether or not a particular target audience was amplifying our narratives with a positive sentences, or another way to see it is whether or not they were amplifying or recirculating the adversary's narrative in that same environment. It's important enough to see whether or not that population is doing so, and and we can visualize that in a number of ways. And Zignal provides. I'd pass it back to you, Alex, because Zignal provides a number of tools on their platform. My favorite is the ping map, which allows us to show sort of a heat map of geographically of the scale of population engagement. But again, it's just figuring out different social science methods to bring together into a picture. But I would also add, before passing back to Alex, I would also add it's also important to have a sense of the decision makers and how they receive information. And I think that's one of the reasons why Alex is so hip on the geospatial, because it helps decision makers and senior leaders visualize that environment a lot better in order to make choices about operations in the information environment.
Thanks for that, John. Really interesting. We had a recent discussion with Matt Venhouse, who is with the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, ARLIS, and he described a really interesting TTP that they've observed where sending a tweet in, let's say, English to a country where English may not be the predominant language, but because it's in English, or so the tweet text is in English, but then there's like a meme or an image attached to the tweet, which is in the host country's predominant language or one of their predominant languages, and they've found that kind of a TTP is really effective for getting information into that ecosystem in a way that sending a tweet in the native language is less effective, because it's almost like there's kind of like a novelty effect where it's like, oh my goodness, an English tweet, we don't see that all the time, and then that tweet gets more attention within the country than a native language tweet does. But then the meme or the image also there is kind of along for the ride and gets sucked up into the ecosystem and spreads faster. So that's like an example. I'm just curious if you guys have any kind of like a shareable TTP that you have found tends to be insightful or a new way of affecting ecosystems.
Well, I would say, John, because we were able to map the difference between population engagement with US influencers versus local influencers, we were able to show our strategic communicators, our public affairs, our IOers, that the best way to reach an audience is through voices that are trusted within that audience, right? So a lot, and this might seem like a duh moment. You probably should understand that, but I don't think everyone recognizes it. In fact, at least the people we were dealing with it didn't recognize it. But when we showed them, when the US platform engaged, here was the response. But with the same narratives, when a particular country and their trusted influencers or their influence network engaged on the same narrative, you can see the difference in population engagement and population sentiment, right? And so it seems like a duh moment, I don't know, but not everyone is responding, not everyone is reading English language. But we need to pay attention. It's just doing, the psyopers out there will know, just doing the target audience analysis and finding the right influencers as pathways, as mediums to which, and that would be the fundamental connection to influence. If you're able to get the local population to amplify your narrative, there is a measure of influence that you can monitor.
If I can comment on that point, John, because I mean, I I know you and I have railed against this institutionally, but if we could take all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into trying to get an article on a military operation, activity, or investment in the New York Times, right? And take all that blood, sweat, and tears, instead invest in getting that same message and narrative and press about the event in local media, we would be making massive progress, right? Because let me just tell you, the people who are trying to reach in Serbia or Bosnia, that they're not reading the New York Times, right? And we pour all this effort into reaching these giant institutions or talk to these journalists to get whatever coverage, and it has zero to little impact on the information environment that we should be caring about. And if we just took that energy and just spent a little bit of time trying to reach the organic and trusted entities in those places, that would make such a massive difference. So, but you know, you got to do the hard work. You got to define who those people are, so that you can start to measure them and watch them, and then understand the impact that they have. And then there needs to be a concerted effort there. So it's just about shifting where we're putting our priorities.
Right. You know, the way I translate what you were just describing, Alex, is like instead of going for point targets, we need to be going for area targets. It's not, or, you know, the whole shift from a kinetic mindset to a mindset of competition, where it's probabilistic warfare. You don't have to knock all the pins down to chip away at the influence game. And so it's a steady drumbeat of affecting some of the people some of the time, and doing it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, rather than, like you said, we need to hit the home run and get a front page article in the New York Times and victory.
Yeah, true.
Well, where is this going, fellas? You know, you've described your platform and the kinds of things you're doing now, but if you could fast forward, what are the kinds of things that are on your mind relative to all of this?
Yeah, I'm not gonna put Alex on the spot, but if I was a customer of Zignal, here's the sort of things I would look for. I got to tell you, because we know it's there, because the data lake is there, what can we do about forecasting? Right? What sort of predictive intelligence can we do? And it's not just to say, what is the adversary going to do? What's the population going to do? It goes back to the purpose of this podcast. How do we know the measure of effectiveness if we don't know what's the historical trend associated? For example, let's use Russia as example. You know, the Zapad exercise. How does that translate in the information environment historically? And so that when we can design new information operations or strategic communications campaigns, we can then measure how effective those campaigns are against historical trends, but also predictions of what would happen around geopolitical events, for example. And in the same respect, if I was a customer of Zignal, one of the things I would like is the ability that use that AI ML capability and create a sandbox that these, you know, garnered from the long history that you have, from the deep well of data that you have, and say, okay, if I'm going to develop a strategic communications campaign around the anniversary of this geopolitical event, let me test it out, right? We have the historical data. Let me put together some narratives, some themes, and some messages, and let's play. Let's see how it could perform in the information environment, in a sandbox environment, so that we can test. Otherwise, what you have is, unless you're focus grouping, unless you're doing surveys, that you don't have a way to sort of experiment, to prototype. If you we prototype things, why can't we prototype narratives and messages in the information environment? I think the tools are there, and if I was a customer of Zignal, that's sort of things I'd be interested in.
Yeah, so I mean, John, I think you nailed it. Forecasting, predictive, prescriptive analytics is definitely the wave of the future. I mean, the good news is that we have the data. We've got 10 years of data, multiple years of competitor data from Russia and China. So it's all there. The lake is there. You can examine it. Just requires a creative or clever data scientist to employ the right algorithms to look at that data and the narrative intelligence in the right way. But that is all within the realm of the possible. And so, to that end, I mean, there are a couple of different directions that our company is going. Partly with the help of John and some members of our team, we are pioneering further work in narrative intelligence and being able to track emerging narratives. And within our future product development plans, there certainly is the ability to kind of sandbox the information environment and begin to run tests and analysis on what potential messaging would look like. How would it impact that information environment? So that is a future direction. Also, we hit on geospatial, I think, briefly. I mean, the beauty is with our platform and the work that we've done, we have the metadata to do very intense geospatial analysis. So the ability to track emerging narratives or threats or risks, indications and warning in the information environment and put a geospatial spin on it, that capability is there. I think we're going to develop that in the future, and you're going to see more of that being applied. And then interestingly, we hit on it at the very, very end, and we touched on, I mean, what I would love to call meme warfare. I think that's a real thing. I mean, warfare is taking place in a competitive environment, and one of the most impressive developments in the last 5 to 10 years is these little memes, a clever image with an interesting catchphrase, which catches on like wildfire and gets shared to 1 million people within 24 hours, right? And so to be able to advance your technological capabilities to do at once image recognition, object detection, optical character recognition at the same time, and then to be able to diagnose where that clever little meme is coming from is also part of the future. So it's all those things. There's a lot to do. Luckily, we have the data in the background to do it. So really excited. The next 6 months are going to be big, and I know that we will be having some significant announcements over those months, and definitely want to continue to further the government, the public sector mission. So we're there. So it's been great partnering with people like John, who have the vision to lead the direction of that platform.
Thank you guys both for this behind the scenes look at some, really what this is just bleeding edge social science, applied social science to both national security and commercial challenges. And we wish you and your colleagues all the best in support of national security in particular. And with that, Alex Del Castillo and John DeRosa, thank you both so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks so much. This was great. Appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.